I'm actually going to pull up my website.
Okay. Oh, let me share too. Hello, everyone who's joining later or live. We're excited to have you and super excited to have Lyndy with us today. As you know, she joins us once a month, and she is a therapist and a coach and has a practice here in Utah, and is such a great resource for our team on all things mental health. And so we're excited to learn from her. And on today's call, I'm especially excited, as I have my red light here, always going. It's going to be really annoying for people watching these recordings back. Like my square is always going to be red in the winter. But we're talking about seasonal affective disorder. SADS, as a lot of times you hear it, or just seasonal depression. I think there's like a lot of different terms for it, but Lyndy's going to talk about that today. And I think it's such a great topic. I live in Utah and I definitely feel the effects of that. This from like November till April. So I think it's one of those things that I don't know that I'm not happy until April when the sun comes out. And I just feel so much joy. And I realize like, oh, I've been lacking a little bit there. And so I think whatever we can do proactively to support ourselves through the darker, colder seasons is so important. So I'm excited to learn from you as well.
Yeah. And being proactive is key, like, because, so there's a term for it, was seasonal affective disorder, which is basically a subset of depression, right? But also another thing to recognize too, this can also be seen with people with bipolar disorder, where maybe their cycles of depression happen more in the winter, and then their cycles of mania happen more in the spring and summer. But it is a very, very common thing that comes up as the weather changes, and as I don't know about you guys, but I really hope eventually we'll stop this daylight savings time back and forth and just choose one time, like Arizona. But I really in the last few weeks, everything compounds at the same time. I feel like
the holidays,
the time change, it starts getting colder, and I know we have people from all over the country and the world, Henrita's over there in Norway, but even in California, I grew up in California, and I mean, winter there is like 40 degrees, where now I've been in Utah for 10 years. I'm like, 40 degrees, that's great. Whereas when I was in California, it was like, oh my gosh, I need a warm jacket. So it doesn't really matter where in the world you live. And I know places like, I just went to Florida, and we were talking to some people that, like, our server at a restaurant in Key West, and asking a little bit about the weather patterns. He's like, it doesn't get over 70 very often, but the humidity fluctuates. And having not been from the South and live in the South, that like humidity is hard for me. But it doesn't matter where you live. There are fluctuations in weather patterns, in light patterns, that might impact how you feel. And yes, seasonal affective disorder is when we're looking at depression symptom onsets when winter hits, when it starts to get darker, when it starts to get colder, when the days are shorter and when there's not as much sunlight. So knowing that and being proactive about that is one of the best resiliency things that we can learn about how to handle that. But I think it's also important to really start to understand two things. One, understand the signs and symptoms. And then second is those, what we call protective factors, or basically the coping skills, like Michaela with her red light, right? My desk is in front of a window. I have the blinds open. I have candles right by my computer, so that when I'm doing sessions from home, I light candles because I love the smells and it just makes me feel good. So those are some of the protective factors that if I know what the symptoms are, Michaela has a candle too. If I know what my signs and symptoms are, I know my toolbox and things that protect me from those challenges when they start to pop up more. So that's some of what we want to talk about today. I actually wrote a blog about this on my website just the other week, and we just updated our website. But this is some things to kind of be aware of. And I love breaking it down Because depression is just not feeling so sad that you can't get out of bed. Or depression is not just feeling suicidal. Now, are those signs of depression? Yes. But there are other warning signs and ways that depression and anxiety impact you. But I love breaking it down this way: physical symptoms, mental symptoms, emotional symptoms, and then social. Because when you start looking at it in these four categories, most of the times when I show this hand out to clients in session on a piece of paper, I have it like column out in four things. You can see symptoms or warning signs in each of these sections. So, for example, how many of you see sleep changes as the weather changes, things get darker?
I just want to sleep like 12 hours a day in the winter. Where in the summer I can run on 6 or 7 and feel like, way better. I feel like I need an extra 15% of sleep in the winter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I usually love to get up in the morning and work out. And, for several reasons, that's been very hard for me this year. But I've noticed in the last couple of weeks, well, plus I got sick and lots of travel, but I am struggling to get up because it's so dark and cold.
Yep. I'm the same way. I love getting up early in the morning to work out. In the last 2 weeks, probably since the time change, although it got darker in the mornings before, so kind of in the last, just this past month, it's been so much more challenging to get up early. So I feel that.
Yeah. So that's something now, and I've seen this on some of your guys' Hungry Fitness team or Henrita's page or Michaela's page. I follow all your coaches. So I've seen these questions kind of pop up where lots of people have related to that, of difficulty of getting up and getting the workout in the dark. And I think this is where that self-compassion really comes in, of either, okay, how can I adjust my schedule? That's something Henrita I've talked about for myself. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, either in December or January, how do I prioritize while it's dark outside some daylight hours to get my workout in, because it's important to me. It makes me feel good. It helps my mental health. But if I keep telling myself I'm going to keep doing that 5 a.m., I'm setting myself up for judging and being hard on myself because, oh, look, Lyndy, you didn't do it again. I got up Monday morning and I didn't get up the last 2 mornings to do it. So in my head today, I realized, all right, Lyndy, you got to adjust, because telling yourself you're going to do it at 5 a.m. and not keep doing it is making you feel pretty shitty about yourself. So how do I adjust it so that I can make it happen, but in a way that fits with what's going on in the weather, in life, in holidays, all those different things. So that's what we call cognitive flexibility. And I think that's so important when you're thinking about seasonal affective disorder, because if you're more prone to it, where you're having a harder time sleeping, or you feel more fatigued, or here they talked about mental, you're having more negative thoughts, or you're feeling low motivation. If you try to keep doing the same thing that was working for you during summer, how do you end up feeling about yourself? Most of the time, pretty crappy, right? And what happens when you feel crappy about yourself?
I think it's kind of a spiral. If you're not showing up for yourself in the ways that with your expectations of how you think you should show up for yourself, then it can create a lot of just feeling of inadequacy and add more stress, more pressure, sometimes more shame. And then all of those things don't leave you feeling very happy and joyful. So it's kind of hard to dig yourself out of that. And then show up for yourself because you're feeling inadequate, shamed, guilt, all the things, versus just stopping that and recognizing, wait a minute, we're in a different season. I need to have different expectations on myself right now. And what do I need to support myself? I'm not getting all the sunlight. I'm just learning so much more about sunlight exposure and how important it is to our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health. So much of we're like plants in a lot of ways. Sunlight's very important. And so just knowing I'm going to be in a bit of a deficit without all the sunlight exposure that I'm probably getting in the spring and summer. So what can I do to support myself, I need to bring some of that self-care up in order to, and probably grace up right now in this new season. And that's okay. And my expectations probably need to come down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I'm thinking also that your energy is already lower. And then if you're using a lot of energy and putting yourself down, it's just you're already on minus. And then now you're further in minus because you're using that energy for something negative instead of something positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love these.
Yeah. So this is actually, some of these are focused on grief, but it's really applicable too, because, one of the things that my practice, Mind and Strength, and my coaching approach really focuses on is building resiliency, our ability to adapt in difficult times. And the four of those, and we've talked about that in here in past, calls, is connections. How do we build connections? And I'm really a huge proponent of how do you build a connection with yourself. And I agree that sunlight and movement is such a good way to build that connection with yourself. I loved Henrita's post about feeling like yourself again, in a workout this week, or like I did. And it's funny because I'm having a hard time because a lot of my daylight hours are at the office, which is why having a window in my new office space was like critical.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's funny how you don't realize how important that is until you don't have it. And then you're like, I need this. But connecting with yourself, like I went and took a walk. I did a walking, and then I adapted one of the Hungry Fitness workouts, and I was doing lunges and push-ups in between laps because I knew I needed the outside, even though it was dark outside. Like sometimes that crisp air is that sensory integration that really helps like wake me up. So, connecting with yourself and connecting with your senses, especially when you're struggling with depression, is I tell my clients, it's one of the quickest ways I can help you like get out of that, so to say, funk, right? Because getting connected with your senses helps you get reconnected with yourself. So, whether it be warm or cold, in my office, I have these roll-on essential oils that I have clients use to deal with anxiety. They're great because you can throw them in a purse. You can have them by your bedstand. Smell is highly correlated with memory and calmness, which is why I have candles by my thing. So finding ways to connect with yourself and having a routine can help with that desire to just want to sleep, that desire not to do anything. I had a client the other day say, yeah, I mean, when it gets dark, I just shut off and don't want to do anything because I think it's bedtime. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. By like 5 and 6 o'clock, I don't want to do a thing. So
I'm like trying to send my kids to bed at 6:30 right now. I'm like, it's been dark for 2 hours. It's time for bed. Not working, in case you're wondering.
I know my 11-year-old wants to keep staying up later and later and later. I'm like, no.
Yeah, I'm going to bed. Yeah.
So that's part of that wellness, like finding that routine, that self-care routine. And the more rituals and predictability you can have, the more protective that is to seasonal affective disorder, because our mind and our body crave predictability, right? Why does progressive overload work so well for training and for strength building? Because of that predictability and routine. Same thing with dealing with our mental health. The more predictability and like, yes, honoring that we're in a different season. So I need a different routine and I need to honor that and be kind with myself and adjust that. That's what we call self-compassion. But if you can create a routine or a ritual that you can stick with, that will really help ward off some of those, what people commonly call the winter blues. And that's part of that healthy thinking pattern of like, it's okay to adjust. It's okay to lower my expectations, or it's okay to reach out for more support, reach out to my network, whether it be my therapist, my coach, my friend, my partner. Hey, I tend to struggle a little bit more with motivation during the winter. Can you call me, or can we do this together? I had a client just ask like, so is it that we reach out for help, or do we need to be self-sufficient? Like, it's not one or the other. It's actually both. There's things you want to do for yourself, but you also want to be vulnerable and reach out to other people when you need it. That's part of that building healthy connections, having healthy thinking patterns. And then the last one of that, finding the personal purpose and meaning. Also, there's a different meaning and purpose maybe in these months when you struggle with maybe some depression symptoms, low motivation. The other thing that came up as I was kind of researching this, and I bet you guys as a Hungry Fitness team might know more about this than I do, is that they actually said one symptom is increased cravings for carbohydrates. And I'm wondering if that's energy related.
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So it would be interesting because I know I've noticed that in myself as well. But I also know from past diets where they're like, you can't eat carbohydrates, and fighting that all or nothing mindset of needing to like readjust, like, no, it is okay. And learning, what is symptoms of the depression versus what's my body needs. Like, I'm sure that's stuff that comes up for you guys as you're coaching with people. But I thought that was an interesting to be aware of, that is a common symptom that happens in the winter.
Yeah. And I think I have noticed personally, like there is still sun outside in the winter, but it's hard to access it because it's cold and it just doesn't sound nice to go outside. But for me personally, I've realized like, if I go outside for a walk, or if I like go skiing with my kids or whatever it is, if I just force myself to get outside and I'm, warm, I'm dressed appropriately, it's so beautiful and it's so peaceful in the winter, and you can feel that sunshine and get the benefits there too, which is going to help from an energy standpoint for sure. So remembering that too, like if you are feeling low on energy, go take a 10-minute walk and feel the sunshine on your skin, and you can still access the benefits of that too. It takes more intention because it's harder when it's cold out, when it's 15 degrees outside, to be like, oh, just go out there and get outside.
I think it's a combination, probably also like not getting as much energy from the sun as you would in the summer, meaning you'd crave that energy and carbs instead, but also maybe being more still in wintertime, being more inside, being more, closer to the fridge, so to speak.
This is still active on her thing.
I want this, as the same, like if you're home more, you're probably gonna eat more, go straight to the kitchen. But if you're busy, you won't do that. Like, so I think it's a combination probably of both.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's again where this idea of self-compassion, oftentimes one of the things that people misunderstand about self-compassion, but I find self-compassion so critical to maintaining and improving your mental health. But self-compassion isn't self-pity or giving up. It's, hey, you know what? A lot of people struggle with this over the winter. This is a common human response to these changes, and that's okay. And it's common not to maintain high levels of functioning constantly. There's going to be ebb and flows. So acknowledging that doesn't make you worthless. It doesn't make you less capable. It's being kind, recognizing that you have more in common with other people, because we tend to try to individuate and set ourselves apart from other people. But when we actually collectively see we're all in this together, it actually empowers more change than if we're hard on ourselves. We can't hate ourselves to a better version of ourselves, but that's what a lot of us have tried to do. So recognizing, okay, there's physical symptoms related to depression. There's mental, less motivation, might be less creativity is a great way to access protective factors for depression, right? And altering what creativity might look like. Like, I used to never describe myself as a creative person. I was like, oh, I can't draw for the life of me. Do not give me a DIY craft. That is not my thing, right? But one way I'm creative is the way that I teach and the way I connect with people, and realizing that, and music, like I love to sing, So so I put a lot of Christmas music on in my car or in the house. And so accessing what's creative for you that helps you and create memories is something that can be a protective factor during the winter months. But again, practice that self-care, recognize what are your symptoms physically, emotionally. A lot of people will tend to isolate more and they won't share with how they're feeling. And that is something that's going to increase your depression over the winter. So emotionally, if you see yourself withdrawing from people, not reaching out so much to people, or let's say you notice friends doing that, reach out to those friends. Or notice, have I connected to at least 5 people this week, right? Have I had a meaningful connection with my spouse? Have I had a meaningful connection with my kids? If I have kids, have I had a meaningful connection with a coworker? If you're not having some of those meaningful connections, that's kind of a tangible point you can ask yourself. If I increase those meaningful connection, how is that going to change how I feel? So socially, here's what's interesting. Socially, especially in December, Thanksgiving into December, we can overdo it.
Yeah.
Socially. So how do you guys recognize when you're overdoing it socially and maybe need to pull back?
I think when I feel stressed, like, oh, I have too much on my schedule of places I need to be.
Like exhausted, anxiety, and those things.
And I think too, we overdo it on the social obligations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're getting connection at all of those. So that can be really stressful too. You're going to all these social engagements, having these surface level conversations. You're not having any like true connection. I mean, maybe you are if you have amazing people in your life that like are actually wanting to know how you're doing. But a lot of times it comes down to like maybe stress because you're not meeting expectations of people that you're gathering with, or you're worried about how they perceive you, or it's not always like safe spaces for people over the holidays. And so I think that can add a level of anxiety and stress. And then you're also lacking in connection, maybe where you need it, like true safe connection. And that can add a whole other level of, anxiety and stress and depression through this season.
Yeah, the anxiety I hear a lot. Like I had a client come in just the other week, had her notebook, and she sat down with her notebook. She goes, "How do I not dread the holidays?" That was the opening statement for our session. Because it does. So a lot of times I refer to it as anticipatory anxiety. And we saw this a lot also when I worked in the emergency room, where the actual holiday, like actually Thanksgiving Day or actual Christmas Day, typically in terms of psychiatric problems in the ER would be low, but the weeks leading up to it were high because everyone was anxious and worried about that holiday, that they worked themselves up into a mental health crisis, anticipating, awfulness or conflict or whatever.
Everything.
Which is why I start talking about this like October, beginning of November, because I know it's the weeks leading up to it, not the actual day, that tends to create more crises. So that's where self-care is so important over the next couple of weeks, because usually it's that anticipation of the holiday or the buildup of the holiday that can really add to your depression, anxiety. So maybe I cut back on social engagement the next couple of weeks, or I increase my physical self-care because that helps me have the strength to deal with the social, right? So recognizing, okay, how do I feel the weeks leading into the actual holiday, and what can I do to proactively take care of myself better over the next several weeks?
Yeah. And I feel like you talked about this in one of our calls too. We could probably talk about this for hours, but of like worst case scenarios too, because I know I'm kind of a natural people pleaser. And so it's easy for me to catastrophize something. Like if I know I have something coming up that feels stressful, like it's easy for me to just, oh, it's going to be so horrible. And then when I actually get there, it's like, that was okay. And so I think that's probably a normal thing for people to do, but how something that has helped me is remembering, like, thinking through, I'm not responsible for other people's perceptions of me. And so you can kind of like giving yourself, taking the pressure off of yourself at these gatherings, or like maybe looking at your calendar and seeing like, what is stressing me out? Like, I'm just feeling this anxiety everywhere, but I don't know what it's directly related to. Like actually pointing like, what are you feeling anxious about that's coming up? And then what about that engagement are you anxious about? Are you anxious about maybe seeing in-laws or, and how they're going to perceive you or whatever it is? And then thinking through like, is that true? Am I anxious about something that's a reality, or is it something I'm just catastrophizing in my head? And then if it is true, like, okay, maybe they are disappointed in me or whatever it is. What does that mean for me? Like, how am I feeling about myself and how can I interact? And so just like, I think thinking through the things that are stressing you out and pinpointing what they are can help you identify, are they true and like real, or are they something I'm kind of making up in my head? And then if they are true and real, like, okay, how does it actually affect me if they like hate me or, whatever it is? I think they're just thinking through that. Like, I think a lot of stress from the holidays comes from interactions for people. Like they have to be with people maybe they aren't in their everyday life, and that can bring up a lot of emotions.
And on that note, there are two thoughts. One, we all write a story in our head of how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive other people. But we need to think of our story more of a book with several chapters. And you're the author, and you can always rewrite the chapter. I'll be honest, I learned over Thanksgiving that I actually, over the last several years, I actually prefer the smaller gatherings. I grew up with huge holiday gatherings, and over the last several years, I was like, oh, I missed that. And then having had to do an extended big family gathering over Thanksgiving, I was like, I actually like our small little intimate gatherings. So we're the author, like if we can develop this idea of, okay, I can rewrite my story. I can focus on what can I have influence over. Then that can change that perception of, do I really need to worry so much about what other people think? The other thing I want to, and I'll try to post it on my Instagram story. So if you don't follow me, find me on Instagram. I'll post it on my stories. I have a worksheet where it goes through that exercise, Michaela, where it's like, okay, if X, Y, and Z is true, what does that mean about me? Okay. And if that is true, what does that mean about me? And it's called the trickle down why. So we're basically trying to get from the anxious thought to deep rooted
reality.
Why do you really worry about that? And a lot of times it comes down to fear of shame, judgment, or blame. So those are all things. Yeah. And like I said, like recognizing how these things affect us physically, mentally, emotionally, and socially, especially around the winter and holidays, will really help you look at and build toolboxes of how to be more protective and proactive during this season.
Okay, to wrap up, Lyndy, what would you say are like your top couple of things that you give clients in this season that are like easily application? Like what can they do this week that's going to be helpful?
Have a set bedtime routine and include some sort of ritual of self-care in that bedtime routine, whether it be lighting a candle, whether it be meditation, whether it be drinking some water or chamomile tea, some sort of routine that helps you feel self-care. Getting movement. I don't care what it looks like, getting movement and getting some sunlight. Those are top three.
I love that. I love those. Yeah. And schedule them. Don't just say you're going to do them. Schedule them. Make an appointment with yourself for all of those.
Exactly. Because the more routine you build in, the easier it becomes to do it, even when you don't feel like it, because your brain functions on that predictability.
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining and teaching us. And if anyone has anything they want to discuss for next month or the coming months, please let us know and we'll plan for that, because we want to support all of you. So thank you.
Awesome.
Happy holiday season, everyone.
All right. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Before we know it. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.